So yeah, thank you very much to the forum for inviting me to speak to you all today. My name is Phil Slarks. As Rosa said, I'm Assistant Director for Innovation Policy at the Department for Business. And today I'm going to talk to you a bit about our research and development roadmap and also the innovation work we're taking forward subsequent to that. I think one note before I go any further, we see this very much as a start of a conversation. We want to hear your thoughts on the innovation landscape and what government can do to support it. So I think at that point, next slide, please. So to start with the R&D roadmap, which was published in July of this year. Some of you may already have read it, so do sing along at home if so. So the roadmap aims to set out the scale of the government's ambition in the R&D sphere. And I think it's fair to say that those ambitions are pretty high. We want to cement the UK's position as a global science superpower. So as you'd expect, the roadmap sets out the areas we think the system works well at the moment and the areas where we think we need to make improvements, and also how the different bits of the system interact. The roadmap itself reflects and interacts in detail with a number of fairly significant funding commitments that the government has made in the R&D space, as Dick was saying a moment ago, starting with the announcement at Budget 2020 that R&D spending would increase to 22 billion by the year 24-25. And we had a waypoint on the way to that at spending review recently, as Dick said, with around 15 billion to be spent in the year 21-22, and more detail to follow at a further spending event next year. And this is all working towards the overall target of reaching 2.4% of GDP being spent on R&D right across the economy, so private and public sector. And the roadmap is setting out some of the ways we will use those spending commitments to boost R&D right across the piece. And the roadmap, of course, also set out some specific actions in specific areas, and that's a good point to move to the next slide, please. So the roadmap set out our plans across 7 themes. I'm not going to talk about them all in detail now, but just picking out a few highlights. So the first thing to say is that attracting, retaining, nurturing a high quality and crucially a diverse R&D workforce is at the centre of our plans. And that's why alongside the roadmap, we announced the formation of the Office for Talent in number 10 to ease the progress through the immigration system of some of the world's leading research and innovation talent. And we'll be saying more about how we plan to do that in a forthcoming people and culture strategy for R&D in the new year. Another area to focus on is the levelling up agenda, which is a top priority for the government, as you'll know, and I know Richard Jones is speaking about that later. But we want to make sure that the science and innovation system are making the fullest possible contribution to levelling up the UK economy and spreading growth right across the UK. So again, there will be an R&D place strategy in the new year to set out more detail for how we do that. Recently, you might have noticed the publication of the Freeports prospectus, inviting bids to form new freeports across the UK. And a core policy objective of that is to drive innovation in places across the UK. And then there's innovation, and that's where I'm going to focus for the remainder of this presentation. Next slide, please. So where do we start from on innovation? Well, as you'll know, we have some really significant strengths in the UK innovation ecosystem. The Global Innovation Index suggests we're ranked 5th in the world and one of the best places in the world to locate and grow a business. And we have really leading cutting-edge innovators in sectors and places right across the UK. We attract significant FDI and venture capital in our innovation activity, and have a really vibrant startup ecosystem of innovative firms. And as Dick spoke about so compellingly a moment ago, in recent months we've seen UK innovators and UK manufacturers in particular really responding and turning on a dime to respond to the challenges of the pandemic through vaccines and ventilators and PPE and in many other areas. So a lot of strengths, but we know that we can do more and we need to do more to support innovation in the UK. I think there's at least some validity to the old maxim that the UK performs very strongly in basic research and hasn't always kind of lived up to its potential in the realm of realising the economic benefits of innovation. So there's more to be done there. Next slide, please. So what we're doing now is developing a really broad programme of work to identify what we can do to boost innovation in the UK. And to that end, we've appointed an innovation expert group chaired by Dr. Hiatin Salem of the Royal Academy of Engineering. And they're helping us work out what our objectives for innovation should be and what the key areas we need to focus on to boost UK innovation. Now on this slide, I've set out some of the questions we're interested in and we're thinking about. And it's really important to say, I could have included another handful of areas on this slide, but it's already a busy slide. I didn't want to overload you with information. But these are some of the things we think could be really important. I'll just trot through these very quickly. So starting closest to home, we know we need to make the government's direct support for innovation as effective and as joined up and targeted as possible. So that's the grants and loans provided through Innovate UK, the support provided through the tax system. I know Stuart from Innovate is speaking next. Innovate are obviously one of our absolutely key delivery partners in the innovation space. That's an excellent next step in this conversation. We also need to think about how we can steer innovation towards top priority social and economic challenges and missions. So what Dick was saying before about the response to the challenges of the pandemic, I think is a really good example of that. We want to build on the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund and think how we can help innovation meet those top priority social challenges. Thirdly, we need to make sure that innovators at all stages of their growth have access to the finance they need, and building on the work done, for example, in relation to British patient capital within the British Business Bank, and ensuring that the innovators have access to finance that they need to grow. Fourthly, we need to look across the UK's rules and regulations and ensure that they're as pro-innovation as possible, and that when new sectors and new technologies are developing, that we're on the front foot in developing rules and regulations that can support the adoption and the use of that technology as fully as possible. Fifthly, we know we need to support the process of adoption and diffusion of technology away from the technological frontier. So we know from analysis that there's a really significant productivity prize to be gained if we can do that and make that as easy as possible. And we also think that that could be a really powerful lever in our levelling up agenda. And then finally on this slide, we want to make sure we're encouraging and facilitating the deep collaboration and knowledge exchange between businesses and academia and other parties in the system. And we know, the example of the Catapult Network and the HBMC in particular is a really powerful one in showing what can be achieved when you can bring those different parts of the system together to tackle innovation challenges. So as I say, not an exhaustive list, but there are some of the things that we're really interested in thinking about. Next slide, please. So this is where I'm going to kind of conclude. As I say, those are some of the questions we're thinking about, but we want your help. We want to talk to people about where we should focus and what the top priority actions are for us in the innovation space. There's no question, again, as Dick was saying before, that innovation will be critical to the recovery from the pandemic, but also to the UK's long-term prosperity. So we need to act now to support that as fully as possible. So yeah, we welcome your views on where we should focus, either now in the Q&A section, or if you'd like a more detailed conversation, very happy to have one, and you can get in touch via the conference organisers if that would be helpful. But as I say, this is the start of the conversation. Very keen to hear your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Phil, thank you very much indeed. A great overview of the approach that you're taking. And thank you very much indeed for saying that you'd be willing to take a few questions live during this morning's event. One of the questions that came through recognised that actually there's an awful lot going on in the environment, and it was a specific question about those recent announcements that we saw on the sixth carbon budget, and whether the roadmaps that you talked us through would need some updating to reflect the decarbonisation commitments that were made within that sixth carbon budget. I guess there's a wider question there, which is how will you make sure that those roadmaps stay up to date, and is there a way for people to input to them?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question. So so Dick obviously mentioned the 10-point plan earlier, and the approach set out by the Prime Minister as part of that to supporting clean growth opportunities and realising our objectives in relation to net zero. And there's some really ambitious activity set out there. And then the Energy White Paper, very recently published, again is an important part of that landscape, and again starts a conversation with people about what we can achieve in the realm of clean growth. The other thing to say quickly is that there's a lot of thinking going on in government about our industrial strategy and how we refresh that to take account of the current realities. So that's again engaging in depth with the levelling up agenda and how we can do that, and also how we can build on UK strengths in the sphere of net zero and clean growth opportunities. But exactly as the question implies, it is an ongoing discussion. The government will set out approaches and what our plans are, and we'll always welcome sort of input on what we're missing and how those need to be refined over time.
That's helpful, Phil. Thank you very much indeed. One of the other questions that came up was, I think the question that I've heard asked most regularly in all of my time working in the innovation space. There are lots and lots of areas of innovation that you could focus in on. How do you pick your priorities? What are the priorities that are emerging for you?
Good question. So, and again, it comes back. So I think part of the answer comes back to that refreshed industrial strategy thinking. And it's, I think someone mentioned earlier about sustained competitive advantage. And that's I think, quite a good way of thinking about it. There are a lot of emergent sectors where the UK has some real strengths to build on. So the question for us is, what are those opportunities? Where can government do something to support the growth of those and build on our existing capability to make sure that UK manufacturers, UK innovators can take as much of that global marketplace as possible? So I don't really have a list of sectors or technologies today, but that's exactly the kind of thinking we need to do to work out where the opportunities for the UK are. And on innovation more generally, as I say, that's exactly the conversation we're having with the Innovation Expert Group is, where are the points in the system where we can really kind of make progress to make it easier for innovators and to support them as fully as possible.
Thank you. And a final question, if I may, and it sort of mashes a couple of the questions that have come through in the Q&A function. Obviously, you are going to be preparing for a comprehensive spending review again next year at some point, spring, autumn, we're not sure. There are going to be issues for the innovation community around whether they're still going to be able to tap into some of those funding streams that we saw from the EU. And they're also going to be looking very closely to see whether the funding for innovation, and in particular some of those competitions that they might bid into, could be increasing. Any reflections on the funding that we might see for innovation going forward, please, Phil? And I know it's a difficult question.
Sure, absolutely, but a fair one. So yes, as you say, we're expecting a further spending event next year. We'll set out more detail about our plans for R&D over the next few years. So to specifically respond to your question about Horizon, perhaps first. So as we speak, negotiations are ongoing. What we've said about European funding stream and Horizon is that, we will see if we can associate with acceptable terms. If that's not possible, we'll develop high quality alternative programs to deliver those policy objectives. So we're committed to making sure that support remains in either scenario. And yes, as you say, as we get into next year more generally on innovation funding, that's the work we'll be doing to work out what the priorities should be and where we should be focusing over the next few years. So that's actually why it's a really good time to hear from people about where they think we should be focusing and what the top priorities are. And that's why, you know, we're trying to get our house in order now to make sure we know where we should focus.